Hi, my name is Anne-Marie McDougall and I'm the founder of LeaderBoom.com, and I'm really excited to bring this video to you today from Dallas, Texas, where we're having a leadership discussion with Nandi, Shareef, who is a PhD student in organizational development and who recently spoke at a global human resource conference here in Texas. And our discussion is going to be around the dynamics of change in workforce generations, and more specifically, we're going to have some conversation on the millennial generation and some of their professional and career preferences, learning development preferences, etc. So we're really excited to have you join us for the discussion, and we hope you enjoy. Thank you. Nandi, it's a great pleasure to have you in this interview. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here because I know that the audience will appreciate hearing some of the powerful insights that you have regarding workforce generations and also your perspective on millennials. And so we look forward to starting the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe you could help us by providing some of your background, maybe provide the audience with a little bit of a sense of your professional and your educational experience.
Absolutely. So Anne-Marie, I am an MBA, and I also am currently a second-year doctoral student in organization development at Benedictine University outside of Chicago in Illinois, where my focus is really on the growth, development, and retention of young professionals in the workplace. So I'm doing a lot of my studies on that. Additionally, I serve as the Director of Talent for Students for Education Reform, and before that, my background is in learning and development and also operations.
Wow, that's really impressive, extremely impressive. And so I really enjoyed your discussion at the ASTD Global HR Conference, and I thought maybe we'd touch on some of that subject matter. And maybe we could start with workforce generations, because we know that there seems to be it's a hot topic. There's a lot of interest to understand what those generations are, what their skills and attributes are. So maybe we could start with your perspective, because I know you've done some research on this, on what the generations are that are in the first four generations in the workforce.
Absolutely, and we have one bringing up the rear as well, so I'm really excited to talk about that, and this may be kind of cutting edge information, so I'm glad that I can share it. Depending on what organization you're a part of, you could have 4 or 5 generations in your workplace right now. Starting off with traditionalists. Traditionalists are the World War II generation. They were born between the mid-1920s and the mid-1940s, and they gave birth to one of the biggest generations in the world, the baby boomers. The baby boomers are currently at the helm of the workplace right now, and they are born between 1947 and 1964. They gave birth to a smaller generation, what we call Generation X, and they are the original Generation Me, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the Gen Xers were born between 1965 and 1980 or 81, give or take a few months. And then I am a millennial, and millennials are Generation Y between 1982 and now the cutoff is 1993 for millennials. Depending on whether you have interns or if you have people that are between the ages of like 16 and 22 that may be working in your workplace, depending on if you're in retail or hospitality or something like that. There's also Generation Z. Generation Z was born 1994 or later, and they're also called the regeneration. So it'll be very interesting to see some of the differences in terms of workforce habits once Gen Z actually gets out of college and moves into full-time placement in the workplace.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. In terms of the millennial generation that you just described, is that also known as Generation Y?
Yes, absolutely. Gen Y. Why are we doing this?
Excellent. And so I learned an ASTD statistic over the past few days, and that is that they're anticipating that 40% of the workforce, at least in the United States, will be comprised of millennials in 2020, which is really compelling when you consider preparation. How do we prepare them as emerging leaders in the future? So specific to that generation, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on what some of their needs are in the workforce, in the workplace, how they view the workplace? How can we help them?
Absolutely. So there's a ton to talk about with my generation, so I could go on for hours, but I'll share maybe some of the insights that we talked about in our session at the ASTD conference. more specifically, I'd like to give you an even more startling fact in looking at the global workforce, because I know there's a lot of interest surrounding the global workforce. In 2025, 75% of the global workforce will be made up of millennials.
That is incredibly powerful. In fact, I did see a statistic in the World Factbook that of the 7 billion people living in the world, that the median age is 29. So, when you consider that in the future and how they will shape our future, it is really important to understand their needs, all generations' needs, but just to have a perspective on where some countries do have aging demographics, how do we transfer the knowledge between each other?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the needs then that they...
Yeah, I'd like to share some insights about the millennial generation. I think first and foremost, what sticks out in everyone's mind is the fact that we're so adept with technology. And I remember distinctly receiving my first computer and being on AOL when I was 9 years old, and was immediately connected to people in different countries through chat rooms and through message boards, which was a really, really cool thing. So I'm kind of in the midpoint of millennials. So on the front end, millennials were in high school, moving into college, and then on the back end, they maybe received the technology when they were 5 or 6 years old. So we really did grow up with it. And as a result, I think it's helped to drive our adaptability to change, because we've seen technology change over time. And this isn't just about cell phones or internet. We saw the tape player go to the CD player and now to the iPod, and also from VHS tapes to DVD to now being able to view your videos through live streaming. So there have just been so many technological advances that we have been a part of, that we've seen, that we've embraced, and ultimately have become a part of who we are in organizations. I think additionally also, to kind of go along with the technology, they call us the microwave generation.
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard that.
Which I think is really cool. And I think it's also spot on. The instant gratification that we desire is pretty clear. We receive instant gratification through text messaging on phones, a lot of instant feedback just based on the way that we relate with one another. And so there's a higher expectation for feedback and also just kind of that gratification or recognition in the workplace. So those are a couple of insights that make the millennial generation who we are. Sometimes can be perceived negatively and also can be perceived positively. One of the things that I would like to share that makes us a lot different than some of the other generations is our desire and willingness to give back to the community. The Generation X, they had a motto that was, "We work to live." Gen Xers live to work as long as the work is meaningful and makes a difference and makes global impact. So we love to stay on the computer, do work 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, have no problem doing that as long as we have the freedom and the flexibility in terms of work hours, but then also, and more specifically, that the work that we're doing is really going to tie back to global impact.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful actually. So you talked about technology and how the technology adeptness is there, which is really interesting because I'm from the baby boomer generation. We didn't have internet growing up, you know. We wrote our notes, we had typewriters, we had, reading books, and our telephones were over corded telephones, not over cell phones. So it's amazing the amount of change that we have even witnessed and observed. And it seems that just from my own perspective on my generation, is that there was a lot of focus on working hard, on also making a difference. But I think there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom there that is transferable.
Absolutely.
Across all generations. And what I'd ideally like to see is that all the generations work together to leverage the skills and capabilities that they uniquely have.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you talked about change adeptness, you talked about technology, and you talked about wanting to make a difference in an organization or a global impact. How can organizations, from your perspective, then help nurture that or help communicate that or build that sort of build that, share that value, or build that interest.
Absolutely. So in a lot of my research, what I've noted is that the generations are actually in conflict in the workplace. And I really asked myself a couple of tough questions as I started to do more generational research surrounding my dissertation. And my first question was, why is there so much conflict in the workplace between generations? I call it the war on generations, right? And what I found were really two things that stood out to me. First, that we don't do conflict very well. None of us do conflict very well, and that's why we are in conflict. And if we spent time just understanding the perspectives, the things that we've gone through, what makes us who we are and why we value what we value by generation, ultimately that's how we'll become successful and effective in working together. So in my session at the ASTD Global Conference, one of the things that we discussed was really taking a trip back down memory lane and looking at what makes each generation unique. What happened when we first came into the workforce as baby boomers, as Gen Xers, as millennials, and ultimately noting that when you think about the perspective of a young professional, no matter the generation, we're excited, we want to make a difference. We're idealistic, we're optimistic because we haven't seen anything to cause us to be jaded. And so we really talked about that and noted that because of the differences in values, that can sometimes cause conflict in an organization, but by seeking to understand and then to be understood, that's ultimately when we have a greater and more open and transparent conversation among generations, and that is when we work together to get beyond conflict and really start working toward organizational productivity.
Right, perfect. So there's also a sense that Generation Y or millennials like to career path. They like to be really clear on their career pathing. Mentoring is also something that they appreciate because they want the knowledge, they want the experience, and having 2 or 3 different kinds of careers in one's lifetime is not unreasonable in terms of their thinking. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, I think some of the other generations in the workforce may get a little scared when they start to hear the statistics that I believe on average millennials will change roles at least 11 times in their career. Okay. So if I was a baby boomer, I would be a bit nervous too. But when we start to control for those things, and we understand that there's an opportunity for it to happen, and we work diligently to ensure that there's greater retention, I think that's really where success happens. So in my opinion, when we start talking about interventions, things that we can do to help make young professionals more successful in the workplace, it's really providing paths for career development. Some of the best practices that we've seen across industries and throughout the world really stem from organizations taking a look at, well, what are our entry-level positions that millennials may be coming into? Is there an opportunity to create development programs that allow them to rotate to see what they're most interested in, and then allowing them to be placed there? And then to see a trajectory, a very clear trajectory of this is the next step, this is how long it'll take. These are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they'll need in order to make it to that place. So having a very clear trajectory, if possible, will ultimately help retention because millennials will know where they currently stand and then ultimately where they can go in the company as well.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. So in most multinational organizations or really large organizations, career paths are provided. And then yet, and committed to, however, delivering on the timelines that are expected may or may not happen, depending on the change experience that's happening in the organization. Can you talk to that a little bit? So imagining that I'm having a conversation with an individual who's in millennial or the Generation Y, and we've scoped out a career path, we've set up some mentoring, but the career pathing isn't happening at the timeline that we agreed to. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, we all know that all things don't go as planned, right? And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But the key is transparency, and that's a real need for our generation, and it varies from other generations because you only knew what you could know at certain levels. But we desire the truth. We desire honesty. So if And let me backtrack for a second. Sure. One of the things that I recommended to the participants in my session at the ASTD conference was to have weekly one-on-one meetings with their staff. And that doesn't matter what generation, all staff persons. If you've got a staff of 5 people, and if it's a bit larger, then obviously maybe once every 2 weeks. But having the one-on-one conversations allows for a consistent and open flow of communication that also allows for the career development conversation to be consistent. So if the career planning isn't turning out the way that it should, or the development path is different based on the economic situation within the global economy or the local economy or whatever may have you, they're just differences, then ultimately you've already set that relationship. It's already open. They know that you care about them. The trust is built. So if it's going to take another year, that's great. And then supplement it with something else. There's a really big project that I want you to work on. I want you to take this on because I want you to build these skill sets that you'll need for the next time around or for the next position. Just be open and transparent and provide some alternatives.
Excellent. Great suggestion. I love that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question, Anne-Marie, and I also think it's important. I was doing a bit more research and doing some qualitative interviews yesterday with other millennials who just happened to be here at the ASTD conference, and one of the things that I noted is that there's probably more than 2, but there are definitely 2 archetypes of a millennial. The first archetype is the millennial who is extremely driven. Our parents put us in cheerleading, in baseball, in student government, in Girl Scouts. We've been a part of organizations for our entire lives, so we know leadership. And because we know leadership, while we may be coming right out of college and you all, or someone would say, you only have 0 years of work experience or 0 years of leadership, we would say, I have 15 years of leadership experience. And so as a result, the mentoring that we're looking for is really derived from, okay, what do I need to do to actualize my dreams? I have these goals, I have these ambitions. Like me, I want to retire by 40. So what do I have to do to get there? What are the products and services that I need to create? How do I synthesize everything I've learned and create models and create products and create services that are going to make global impact, but are also going to help me to get to the second part of my life where I'm looking to open micro-lending organizations and do philanthropy full time. So there are those of us. So there are a lot of us out there, but then there's the other archetype of millennial, and I believe that other archetype is the millennial that is really being affected by what we call the quarter life crisis. And the quarter life crisis are really those questions: what on earth am I here for? What am I doing? Who am I? And when you haven't found that out yet, or you went into a degree program like anthropology, but you no longer want to study that or want to pursue it as a full-time career, it's like, well, what's next? Where can I go? Who can I become that's really going to make a difference, that's going to allow me the flexibility that I'm looking for? And so the mentorship that archetype of millennial really needs is someone to really come and seek them out and say, I see you, I know what you're looking for, I know your story, it's like mine. Let's come together and let's have a conversation about what this could possibly look like, even if it's outside of the confines of the organization. So I would call this archetype of millennial hyper, and this archetype of millennial hypo, being high performance and high potential.
Okay, can you provide us with a little bit more clarity on those two?
Absolutely,
Can
absolutely.
you repeat that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly.
So
what I would call a high performance millennial, really a high performance individual anyway, would be that young professional who has goals, dreams, they're considered extremely ambitious and driven, and they're fairly outlined. So the mentoring that they're looking for is really surrounding that trajectory, and they're looking for mentors that can help them fill in the gaps on that goal sheet, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But a high potential millennial is really that millennial that has a lot to bring to the table, but just has no earthly idea about what to do with their skill set, what their skill skill set is, and ultimately how it makes a difference either in their organization or in their lives. So their trajectory is much less planned, and they need more of that hands-on tutoring, that hands-on mentoring, both in skills and also in wisdom, that allows them to actualize, this is what my career path could be. Yeah, Anne-Marie, to be completely honest with you, I've never had a mentor in my organizations. It's never happened. I've always sought out mentors, and I've sought them out outside of the organization. People who have actualized their careers, who've gotten to a certain pinnacle that I'm looking to get to. One thing I've noticed in organizations that I've seen or been a part of is you'll say that you'll mentor us, and you're doing it because you want to advance your career, and you mentor once a year, and it's just like an annual performance review. And it's like, oh, okay, this is what you want to do? Well, you're doing pretty well already. You're a fine kid. Just get going and keep doing what you're doing. And it's not real mentorship, and it's not authentic. So I think it's really important for us, if we're using mentoring as a tool to retain young professionals, that we really look at how much time, how much energy we can devote to it, and be authentically and voluntarily committed to that endeavor.
That's great.
That's a really good question. What's my view of the future? One of the things I see in the future, and this actually comes directly from one of my peers who is considered an expert in the field now. His name is Dan Schabel, and he is the managing partner and founder of millennialbranding.com. So his work is with Fortune 500 companies and doing research and then releasing studies on the habits of millennials. One of the things that he talked about that I've actually seen in my work in Savannah, Georgia, is this co-networking, cohabitation space of several businesses in an open think tank environment. So there's a place in Savannah, Georgia called Think Savannah, where several business owners just rent space, and sometimes it's a cubicle, sometimes it's a table, and some of them have offices. All different companies, all working together in the same space and leveraging the strengths of one another. So I see that as being, one of the telltale signs of what the future will look like, what the future work landscape looks like. Because again, when you have that, we're no longer looking at the 9-to-5 workday, we're looking at the 24/7 workday, where if I'm, in New York City and it never sleeps, I want to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, go to my workspace, do a little work. I have the opportunity to do that, and it's not offensive to what the company culture is, because we've now adapted the mindset of the 24-hour workday and the cohabitation space that you would find where several businesses can come together. I think also the organization of the future allows their employees and their professionals to really pick what their benefits look like, that fit and that are also tailored to their lifestyle. I know for me as a millennial, walking into organizations where, these are your benefits, this is it rigidly, and like, I don't need that, I want the buffet, I want to be able to, absolutely. Speaking of that, we like everything to be customized. Customize the development programs, customize the mentoring, and definitely customize the benefits.
Nandi, it's been such an amazing experience and privilege talking to you today, and I know that the audience has learned so much, as I've learned from you, and I want to wish you all the best.
Thank you.
With everything that you do and the contribution you make to the world is going to be enormous. I know it will be eventually, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Anne-Marie.